Hello, if you haven't watched my last video, I would suggest that you watch that one first. There's going to be a link to this playlist. I hinted in one of my previous videos that I wanted to make a series of videos, or rather several series of videos that talk about the software design and development process. And more importantly, I wanted to give working examples of how one could go about coming up with different applications. I'm going to use the outline that I introduced in the last video. And in this video, I'm going to use the steps that I described in the last video to use concrete examples. By all indications, David Weiss hired a junior developer to create his Flat Earth Clock app. I guess it was cheaper for him at the time. And as a result, it means that there were a lot of bugs and instability in the code from the very beginning. And it took a very, very long time for the application to become even remotely stable. However, the security aspect of the application was never really addressed. And with anything else, this is always a good learning experience. I happened to be following along on MC-Toon's discussion group, and I forgot exactly how it started, but somebody suggested that they should make their own clock app to compete with David Weiss's. I thought I would test the idea that I had about making a series of videos that were instructional that would hopefully help other developers. To formalize what I've suggested already, I decided why not go forward with the idea of giving people a concrete world example of how to properly design a clock app. I was thinking, what would be the point of this entire exercise? Do I really want a finished product that people can use? And I figured that the answer was going to be no. I don't really want something that is so polished that it would be considered production ready. Really, the point that I want out of this is to document the process of software development from the beginning to the end. I wanted to demonstrate that despite all the best laid plans, things in it invariably go wrong. And what seems like a sound design at the start can appear less sound as time goes on, and you end up having to make trade-offs between various designs, technologies, etc. I'm also not planning to make it a tutorial on how to use a specific technology. There's all sorts of videos and websites out there that people have written that show how, for example, to use Spring and Hibernate, for example. However, I think that might end up happening anyway, because in the process, I may end up being in the weeds for a good part of it, especially the part where I'm coding. But with luck, I'll be able to abstract the various concepts that I'm using and describe them in a fairly generic term that can then be applied using any other technology that somebody might choose to use. That was the idea that I had when I made that other video suggesting that I might go in this direction. So at this point, this is where the real work begins. I've had the idea for an application, and now the idea is to sell it to whoever is going to end up buying into it. And in this case, this is going to be my viewers and potentially future viewers, so that hopefully people will be interested in seeing this development process in action. The vehicle to get that accomplished will essentially be an alternative application similar to David Weiss's Flat Earth Clock app, but only better. I'm planning to add a list of features depending on whether time and interest permits, but some of the things that I thought of adding were creating a database where an administrator of the site could add various books and resources, publications, websites, links to videos, and possibly even memes and images that the user could download. It might be interesting to add a chat or messaging system and an equivalent of the Friend Finder. As I've stated before, this is not intended to be a serious application or product, but rather this is intended to be more of a demonstration of the process. I've already tried to create a clock app that looks similar to David Weiss's clock app, so it might end up with what one would consider eye candy. But because this is not really intended to be a serious product, I do not expect people to rely on it as a messaging app or a friend finder or anything like that. And it's worth repeating again, all features and capabilities that I plan to add serve one goal, which is to demonstrate the process of development and not to create a functional or usable app in order to make money. And it's because of that I can choose to go a little bit slower and to make sure that the design makes a little bit more sense and adheres much better to industry best practices. In addition to all of that, for those who decide that they want to follow along during the development process, I plan to use source control, and you'll be able to follow along and see how the changes are committed in source control, and you can get more familiar with the process of software development. I found over time that it is very often the case where a developer will end up writing, rewriting, and modifying their code so that ultimately what looks like all of the best laid plans, new solutions need to be devised. And while there are jobs out there where people can just do coding, there really is a lot more to it than just punching a bunch of keys on the keyboard. I don't really want to say anything negative about David Weiss's app, but there are some features that he added that I don't really see as being a benefit, and I'm not planning to add those. There are things like the NOAA weather data feature, the leaderboard, or the dating feature, for example. What do I hope to accomplish in this video series and in this project? Once again, I find that if I look at the various training exercises that I've had in courses that I've taken, a lot of them tend to be almost generic and thought exercises, and they may very well serve the purpose of getting a point across. But I find that it's fairly truncated, and there's a lot of nuance that just isn't there in the various courses that I've taken in the past. And with this, it would be interesting to come up with a series of videos that show much more nuance than some of these other training courses have shown in the past. They tend to try to give you as much information in as little time as possible, and they end up removing a lot of the material that is needed to pick up on all of the subtleties. And so you might end up learning something and forgetting it a few weeks later because you just haven't developed that connection with how does this apply in the real world. So one of the things that I really want to accomplish in this series of videos is to demonstrate how the selection of specific design patterns in a real-world example can work and what its consequences might be. And yes, it is true that I might end up talking about some of these advanced concepts in a specific language, in a specific environment. And while you may not necessarily try to use the exact same thing in your line of work, let's say, for example, I develop in Java and you might develop in ASP.NET. The hope and the goal is that if I talk about these in a reasonably generic sort of way, that you might be able to abstract those concepts and apply them into your own specific environment. And what started this whole thing off, of course, was to address the insecurity of David Weiss's Flat Earth Clock app, and to show a real-world example of how security is important, and not only how it is important, but how to go about implementing security in a reasonably real-world example. And the flip side of that, of course, would be that if you don't implement security properly, then you could end up having a huge headache. And for example, we could just ask David Weiss how his Flat Earth Clock app is going. And of course, one of the other benefits of showing a real-world example of watching somebody else in action is hopefully to consider thinking in different ways, and to borrow a metaphor, to hopefully expand your toolkit of tricks and ideas to get something done. And finally, like I indicated in my last video, I want to think about an exit strategy, which is, do I really want to commit myself to this project beyond the point of diminishing returns? And with that, if I don't really get much interest from the general public, if this does not seem to be something that people in general find useful, I might just end up walking away from this project. At this point, if I was working in a company, this is where I would be going to various people to get them to put their signature on a piece of paper to confirm whether or not they would end up buying into this. For somebody who might be a project manager, they might end up determining whether or not the project itself is feasible or whether it should be aborted at this point. I could at this point end this video and formally ask my viewers to confirm in the comments if they wanted me to go forward or not. But at this point, I'll just move on to the next step. So how exactly do I plan on building this? My current skill set focuses mainly on Java, Spring, and Tomcat in real life, so that is what I plan to develop this project in. I'm looking to create a Tomcat web application or possibly a Spring Boot standalone application that will serve as a central server. I'm going to have a database. I'll probably use something like SQLite as the actual database with a framework such as MyBetis. The web server will handle account information. People will be able to create their accounts on it. I don't like the idea of having to download a web application just to get something or anything. So it would be nice to use that web server as a web server so you could create a website and people can just point their browser to it without downloading an app. And there would be trade-offs and there would be limitations. I don't want the browser to be constantly hitting the server and having the server render a background, for example. So there's going to be certain limitations in how the web browser will end up querying the server. And then I would end up using JavaScript to render certain features on top of it, such as the orientation of the clock hands. For extra functionality and usability, maybe have a separate web form somewhere that people can choose their settings, and it will, upon request, generate an image of a specific requested projection, or maybe a spreadsheet of computed altitude and azimuth angles or right ascension declinations of celestial objects, etc. This is where it could be useful to show a list of resources, such as the books and videos, etc. And if they log in on the system, they would be able to use the messaging system if I implement that feature. The web server would also have service endpoints so that any client could get similar services as you can with the website. And I was thinking of various other services like Google or Facebook or whatever, where users might want to request a copy of all of their activity. Or, for example, let's say a system administrator wants to export non-sensitive information like the various videos and resources that they've entered into it that they might want to put on a different website, for example. On the client application side of things, I was thinking of using my existing multi-projection Earth clock app that I've already developed and to add additional features to it, such as the ability to call the server and to get various resources. And perhaps if somebody were to port the application to Android, it could make for a nice, fancy, and pretty looking desktop clock app. I've really skimmed the surface of what it means to do the design and the documentation. I've kept things very generic. If this was a real project, it would probably be 15-20 pages describing things in much more detail. But hopefully this gives a sense of the various steps involved. The next thing, of course, would be to assume that there's buy-in and that we're going to go ahead with this project. And so the next step involved would be to actually do the coding. I probably won't end up making more videos on this, at least for a little while. But I do plan on starting coding at some point soon. With winter approaching, this is going to be an excellent time to actually start doing the coding. I do have a Discord server that I'm going to try to resurrect and create an invite link. So I would definitely encourage people to sign up to my Discord server before the link expires. If it does expire, please write a comment and I will try to update the link in the description with a new link. For some reason, it's very difficult to create a link that doesn't expire on Discord. And the idea would be that for those who might be interested, I could perhaps create various Q&A sessions for those who are interested, and or just a place to hang out and goof around and whatever. As time goes on and as I end up developing working code, I might end up creating new videos to continue this series to show the various aspects of how I've gone about approaching the various security constraints, the components in the server, and how everything interacts. I only plan to develop this thing so that it can run on my local machine. And whether I'm successful or not, we will see exactly just where this might end up taking us. And because I don't really plan on making this go live to the real general user, if this project should end up reaching end of life, it really won't be my problem. That's going to be my proposal for this specific project. If you like the video, I would appreciate feeding the YouTube algorithm. You know the drill. If you find this video or this series of videos informative and or instructional, I would really appreciate the comments below. With that, I'm going to see you in another video at some point soon enough. Bye for now.